Devils, and welcome to another episode of the Pro Hockey Pod, episode 82. Here we go again, continuing along with our coaches series. Just seems to be a good part that's working well for this podcast, so I thought I'd continue to do it. And this week, another Ontario guy on, so I'm very happy to have somebody on who's from my province. Anytime I can get someone who's grown up in the area, it's always good to swap stories of the childhood hockey stories, maybe some Leafs talk. Don't know if he's a fan or not, but anyways, this guy is a head coach at University of St. Thomas right now. Has had a long coaching career. Was at the University of Miami of Ohio, University of Denver as well. Played for University Miami of Ohio too, and NCAA back in the day. Happy to have on the Pro Hockey Pod, Rico Blasi.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me. We can talk a little bit Leafs if we want.
It's a sensitive topic right now. So at timing of
Yeah.
filming this, they just lost Game 7 2 or 3 days ago. So the media is all over them here. So that was perfect time for me to come home and see that lost Game 7, and now it's just everything, Overdrive, Sportsnet. They're all just blowing up what they should do. So it's pretty funny. But this podcast is about you, so we always like to start off. Going back to your childhood there. So I believe you grew up in the Toronto area, Weston, if I'm not mistaken. But what's kind of the first memory you have of growing up there?
Yeah, it was obviously a long time ago now, but just really a lot of fun. And, I'm a first generation Italian, so a lot of what we went through, I owe to my parents and my grandparents who obviously immigrated to Toronto. They put in a lot of work so that, we as kids could do what we wanted to do. And hockey was always one of those things. My parents are from Southern Italy, so they knew nothing really about the game. There's not a lot of hockey in Southern Italy. Uh, but my dad came to Canada in 1960, my mom in 1959. They met in Toronto. Um, and so I think the Montreal Canadiens were pretty good back in those days. So my dad became a Montreal Canadiens fan, and I don't even know why. Um, but my grandfather was a Leafs fan. And so when I was growing up, my first memory of me on the outdoor rink on uh, Dundas and DuPont there in Toronto, downtown Toronto, where we lived, I had the Guy Lafleur jersey on. And it's still one of my favorite pictures because I think I was about 4 years old. My uncle, who was a little bit older, a little bit younger when they immigrated to Toronto, had gone to high school, so he learned to skate. So he taught me how to skate. But my dad would take me with his boots, any chance he got to the outdoor rink, which was walking distance. And then I started playing with some of the older guys around the neighborhood, and really became fond of it. Um, and then we made a move. We went from downtown Toronto to Weston there, North York, just on the border there. And and my friends in school were starting to play this, you know, at Amesbury Ice Arena on Lawrence Avenue in Toronto. And I thought, you know what, I want to play. So I went home, told my dad. We quickly put together my skates and stuff. Didn't have any equipment at the time. I think I was 7 years old at the time. And house league in Canada, right? They provide you with equipment. So we went there. They gave me some equipment, got on the ice, and just kind of went from there. And then we became a hockey family from that point on.
It's pretty crazy coming from, as you mentioned, a non-hockey background to coming to one of probably the crazy hockey areas, the GTA there, and just finding the love for the game. Um, when you were growing up there, like playing house league and all that, and you mentioned like your family not having too much background of hockey itself. Like, how were you like learning to progress at the game? Like, were you interesting in coaches you had? Were you doing like power skating, stuff like that back then? Because obviously, as I said, like for me, for example, like my dad was familiar with hockey, so like we kind of had an idea as a kid, like how to take the first steps in learning. But like for yourself, like it was kind of learned by doing in a sense.
For me, it was, kind of just going through it. Um, and so I did, I would go and skate at the outdoor rink all the time. that was my thing. I loved doing that. I would play with whoever, the older guys, the adults, whoever it was. So I played 2 years of house league, and in my second year of house league, I had a guy by the name, a coach you will be familiar with, who was coaching the All-Star team at Amesbury, and his name was Stan Butler. And so Stan coached me as an 8-year-old, and that was my first kind of introduction to what would be the GTHL at that point, MTHL when I played. Because that next year, Stan went to Wexford and took me with him as in those days it was called minor Adam. And so I played for Stan all the way through, and kind of grew with him. And our teams, our Wexford teams back then were so good. I mean, we won three All Ontarios. We won four straight league championships in Toronto. We won the Pee Wee Quebec tournament. We won pretty much everything. And we were stacked. And Stan was the coach, and then obviously went on to coach me in junior hockey, and then went on to the OHL from there. But I never did power skating. My dad, we didn't have a lot of money. So if I'd said to my dad, I'm going to go do power skating, he'd be like, why can't you just go skate on your own? Now, my brother, who was a few years younger, having me been through it a couple of years, he did all the power skating. He did all the hockey schools and stuff like that. I didn't get a chance to do any of that, but I was fortunate enough to play with really good players, have really good coaching, Stan Butler, Kevin Burkett. Um, and so we kind of grew together, and lucky enough to, play junior hockey in Toronto, and then get drafted in the OHL by the Guelph Platers. In those days, size really mattered, and I was a smaller player, and decided I was going to take the college route. And so, as an 18-year-old, just graduated from high school. I never went to grade 13 because grade 13 was the thing to do in Ontario, in the late 80s, before you could go to university in Canada. I think things have changed now, but I didn't go to grade 13. I graduated grade 12, went right to Miami from there. Probably looking back, I should have probably played another year of juniors, but went in as a true freshman, and kind of went from there. But to answer your question, no hockey school, just hockey. We were pretty good, so we had good sponsorship with our team. We skated. We practiced three, sometimes four times a week. Um, for sure, three times a week, and that was unheard of in those days. You went maybe once, maybe twice. Um, and good coaching, good mentors, good teammates, a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you had the chance to play for the famous Stan Butler, who obviously has gone on to have quite the career in Major Junior there, can see why you guys had good teams and won those championships, as you mentioned. You kind of touched on one of the topics I wanted to bring you up, was about the OHL. Like as you know, growing up in Ontario, like the first route we are introduced to is the Major Junior route, and a lot of times it's kind of the only focus, I would say. And you mentioned you ended up kind of realizing, even though you were drafted, you were back then it was all about the size game. So you ended up choosing the school route and going NCAA. But um, for someone like I can relate, like myself, like I wasn't really that educated on the NCAA route. Like I was really focused on the OHL. I grew up in Peterborough when I was younger, so the Petes were everything to me. But um, who kind of maybe like first gave you a glimpse at that other route? Because obviously, as I mentioned, the OHL was, hey, like all the good players go play here, and if you can do well, you get to go to pro kind of thing. But who kind of introduced you to, hey, there's another route that you could have success in?
Oh, great story on that. So that minor Adam team, we had an assistant coach by the name of Mike Morris. Mike Morris's brother played at Miami, was playing at Miami at the time. So this is early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. So Steve Morris was played for the Young Nats in Toronto, and then went to Miami, um, on a scholarship, and Miami was just starting their program. So we took a trip our minor Atom team took a trip to Oxford, Ohio, an 8 hour trip, because Stan was good friends with Mike and the family. And so we wanted to take a trip with the team and let's go play some Ohio teams, right? Who knew about Ohio? We didn't even know where we were going. We knew we were going to cross the border or whatever. Um, so we get to Oxford, Ohio, and we play the same age team. I think we beat them like 18-2 or something. It wasn't even close. And then we got to watch the college game that night, and it was packed. And we got to skate in between periods. They introduced us. It was pretty cool. Um, and then we played the Pee Wee team, which was a couple of years older, and we beat them up too the next day. And so we came home. So that was my first kind of ever introduction to college hockey. Fast forward 8 years later, Stan was always, even as Bantams and as midgets, Stan was always big on school, and a lot of our teammates, my teammates, went on to play college hockey that he coached before he went to the OHL and changed his tune a little bit. But he was really big on schooling. So we, as Bantams and midgets, we would go and visit St. Lawrence. We'd go and visit Clarkson. We went and visited Yale. We went and visited Michigan State. We went and visited Michigan. We went back to Miami as midgets and played their club team. So we were exposed as midgets and then again as junior and junior hockey to the college environment. And then obviously, college coaches are around all the time, even when we were Bantams, because we were a good, the best team in Ontario at the time. So the Michigan State coaches were around, the Michigan coaches were around. There was always somebody from college in Stan's ear saying, we'd like to recruit this kid or recruit that kid when the time comes. So Stan was really a big proponent of that, and we owe him a lot for that because if he wasn't exposing us to that, we probably would not have known that, right? We were the kids that would go to Maple Leaf Gardens back in the day because you could get a $2 ticket for the Marlies and watch the Leafs pregame skate at 11 and stand behind the net and pick up pucks and then watch the Marlies at 1 o'clock and then take the subway home, right? So major junior hockey was always the thing you wanted to do. If you wanted to play in the NHL, you were going major junior hockey.
No, exactly. And it's very rare, like the story you just said, probably for most teams back then. It was, hey, we're trying to get to the OHL or whatever major junior route. And then if you don't, it's you maybe you go Canadian University and then get a real job and that's it. Like it was kind of like I wouldn't say it was as diverse as it is now with all the different routes and everything. But so you ended up going the NCAA route to
Before
Miami.
we do that, Andrew,
Yeah.
too, I would be remiss not to mention when I went to high school, I went to Chaminade College in Toronto. It was an all boys school, and a couple of years ahead of me was a guy by the name of Jason Woolley. And so Jason ended up going to Michigan State. So he was in the high school. He was in the halls when I was a ninth grader, right? Uh, and when we do our pickup skates, I would be out there with Jason. So Jason was always kind of somebody that I was like, I want to go to college hockey. Jason Woolley's a big time player. He's going to Michigan State. I want to go to Michigan State, right? Then I had a couple other guys that were a year ahead of me, like Dino Grassi, who went to Northeastern. So now I'm getting exposed to other universities that I hadn't visited. And so those guys were also very influential in my decision to continue to pursue college hockey. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned those guys. A guy, but and then I remember Gino Cavallini went to our school way back before he went to Bowling Green, and he would come back and speak to us in an athletic banquet or whatever it was at the high school. And so, we knew you could make the NHL if you went to college hockey. So those guys were a really big part of the decision as well.
Well, it's good to have people like that who've like are either doing it or have done it to show that that route also works as well and can be a great route. So obviously helped your decision. As I mentioned, you end up going the NCAA route to Miami of Ohio there. How did you end up picking that school? I'm always curious, like everyone when they make a commitment, obviously, there's going to be interest from multiple schools, maybe you go on multiple visits, whatever it is, but how did you end up deciding on Miami of Ohio?
Yeah, it was quite a process. I had visited Wisconsin, UNH was really hard sell. BU, and Western Michigan were really kind of the four that were really pursuing me. The BU Wisconsin ones, again, I don't know that they were going to offer me fulls. And so, knowing my family background, there's no way I wasn't going to not take a full. I didn't want my parents paying for any schooling or anything like that. So, it really came down. Like I said, I was dead set on going to Michigan State. My two line mates were committed to Michigan State. Uh, Jason Woolley would talk really highly about Michigan State, so I wanted to go to Michigan State in the worst way. That was my dream school. I worked every day when we were doing things. That was the place I wanted to go. They happened to have an assistant coach at the time when I was getting that recruited Jason and would send me letters, and his name was George Gwozdecki. Well, between my midget and junior year, George Gwozdecki took the job at Miami. And so all the correspondence for Michigan State pretty much ended at that point. And so I used to joke with Ron Mason, the late Ron Mason, when I was coaching against him. I said, I really wanted to play for you at Michigan State, but I think George took the recruiting list and you didn't know about me. And he would laugh about it. And then he'd say to me, well, Rico, I wouldn't have recruited you. You're too small. So anyway, but George went to Miami. So I had known George from Michigan State in the correspondence. I felt comfortable with them. My parents felt comfortable with them. In those days, recruiting was a little bit different. The coaches came to the house. They spent time with you. And I remember my parents rolling out the red carpet as Italians would do in terms of a meal. So George ate really well that night. And, um, it just really came down to a feel and where I felt I could trust the person that I was going to play for. And they were an up and coming program and felt like we would get the opportunity to develop, get a good education, and you know, see what happens. And then a couple of my teammates that we were playing at Wexford with also came with me. A guy by the name of Bob Marshall, who was an All-American, Renee Von Lanthen, Andrew Miller. Um, and so we had some comfort level in that as well. And as freshmen, I can tell you we stunk. We had 12 freshmen. We our highlight player, although he wasn't a highlight player at the time, was Brian Savage. He ended up being a pretty good NHLer when it was all said and done. But we finished last my freshman year. We really took our lumps, and then by the time we were juniors, we had won the CCHA league championship and went to the NCAA tournament for the first time in school history. So, looking back, it was a tough decision, but kind of set me up for where I am today, to be honest with you.
Well, it seems like, they checked a lot of the boxes that you wanted, and you also, with a new upcoming program, that normally means that there's going to be a lot of playing time. Where at, historic programs, it might be like kind of like the old way of, wait your turn, earn your way into the lineup kind of thing. But you mentioned before we talked about it that you, looking back, felt that you might have or maybe should have played another year of junior before going. Like, was that just because being a true freshman, or do you look back now and say, like, maybe going a year later, one more year of junior playing, I could have jumped into college maybe easier?
I say that now because I'm a coach and I see a lot of these guys, and we have the same conversation. Like, be over ready when you come to college. I was certainly, I don't think, ready to play at that level, but I did. And we all did. And that's probably why we took our lumps, but it might have been by design, from George's perspective, just to get us in the system and go through the heartaches so that we could, eventually win the CCHA. Um, but for me personally, I probably could have used another year just in terms of strength and size. Playing college hockey at Division One level at 150 pounds probably wasn't ideal, but we got through it. And like I said, it probably was the best decision I've made in my life to this point.
Yeah, and as you mentioned too, you guys as freshmen there, the 12 of you grew every year together and eventually was able to win that championship and the first one in school program history, which obviously is a great feat to have on the resume. You finish your 4 years at school there. There's always a decision to make. What do I do next? Do I try to go play pro? Do I move back home and get a job with my degree or a regular job? Do I get into coaching? You obviously decided to get into coaching. Did you always know you wanted to do that after playing, or was there debates of maybe trying a couple of years at pro? Like, how did maybe the decision process go during that last couple of months there at school?
Yeah, it didn't start that way. So I ended up staying a couple of weeks to work hockey school at Miami to make a little money, but I was set on playing pro hockey. So I signed with the Tallahassee Tiger Sharks, which was an expansion team in 1994. Um, I remember walking and working with George. George had just taken the job at the University of Denver. So he was leaving Miami and going to Denver. And I remember talking to coach, and he kind of asked me, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I think I want to try and play pro, maybe go over to Europe." I had some opportunities to go play in Verona in the Division Two in Italy, and thought, let's try playing here in the U.S. and see what happens from there. I can always go back and play in Europe if that was the case. At least that's what I thought in my mind. So that's the conversation I had with George, and George's like, "Well, Rico, if you ever decide that you want to stop playing, I want you to give me a call, and let's discuss maybe you getting into coaching." And I didn't think anything of it really. So I went on my way that summer, and I got ready to play in the East Coast Hockey League. Well, uh, the NHL in 1994 went on strike. And so when I got to Tallahassee, there were a lot of American League players that were sent down because there were a lot of NHL guys that were sent down in the American League and the IHL in those days. So everybody was kind of filtering down. So it really became uh, kind of a numbers game in the East Coast League at that point because teams were wanting to play their guys and play the American League guys because the NHL affiliates were telling them that. So after camp, I made the team. After camp, I got called in just before our first regular season game. Got called in the office and said I was traded to Toledo. So okay, no problem. Toledo, Ohio, a little closer to home. No big deal. Uh, Left Tallahassee, flew to Toledo. Was in Toledo for probably about 2 weeks, maybe. And I remember getting on the ice, warming up, and then coming in the locker room and being the scratch for the game. And that happened 3 times. So I never ended up playing a game, but was scratched 3 times. And then the guys that were scratched, you know what happens to those guys the next day? They're getting skated, right? So that went on for a little while, and then I finally just had enough. I started kind of, reading the room, and all these guys were coming down from the American League or the IHL, and I'm thinking, well, these guys are draft picks, and I'm not going to get the opportunity to play here. So what am I going to do? Called home, you know, uh, I think I had a really good heart to heart with my dad about just playing and things that we had accomplished over the years and why are you doing it? And that made me think a little bit. And he said, "Well, if you want to come home, I'll buy you a plane ticket. You'll be home tomorrow." And so I thought about it a little bit, called Stan, talked to Stan for a little bit, talked to George for a little bit, and then just made that decision to go home. One of the things that Stan offered me, he was in Oshawa at the time, but the Wexford junior team that I played for needed an assistant coach. And so now, don't get me wrong, the junior hockey in Toronto in those days didn't pay coaches, right? They were volunteers. So I still needed to do something. I couldn't just sit around the house. I went home after some good advice from all those people that I trusted, and ended up working with the Wexford junior team, and I loved it. I was assistant coach. I would work with the guys in their college applications and trying to get those guys all situated for to go into college. We had a really good team. Our captain was Gavin Morgan, who ended up playing the NHL and came with us to Denver. I'll tell you that story in a second. But so I ended up being an assistant coach on that team, which I never thought I would do. And so I got to live at home for a couple of months, which I hadn't done since my freshman year. And my uncle, who was manager of a lighting service company in Toronto, gave me a part-time job so I can make some money during the day. And so I did that for about 6, 7 months, worked at the lighting service company and coached, was an assistant coach with Wexford. George Gwozdecki was recruiting their staff was recruiting Gavin Morgan and a couple other guys from our team. So George came into town one day and we went to lunch and he said "What are you doing next year?" I said, "I don't know. So I'm probably just gonna keep doing what I'm doing." He goes, "Why don't you come to Denver and be our graduate assistant? Um, we'll give you some responsibilities. I'll take care of your schooling. You'll get your master's, and then we'll see where it goes from there." And having played for George for 4 years, I had a pretty good relationship with him, and I trusted him, and I said, "Okay." Uh, then I had to go home and tell my parents that I was leaving again, which wasn't easy. But I packed my bags that summer and went to the University of Denver and was the grad assistant and um, started, working on the ice with the guys. And then you get the itch to teach and started loving that again. Um, and then that first year after, and we had some really good players at the University of Denver. Um, some real high-end NHLers, Antti Laaksonen, Eric Anderson, uh, Paul Comrie, Gavin Morgan was on that team, Mark Rycroft. We had a slew of guys that played in the NHL. But anyways, that after that first year, I'd gone back home to work at Upper Canada College Hockey School for the summer, and in the meantime, Greg Drexel, who was an assistant coach at the University of Denver, decided he wanted to become part of the LA Kings scouting staff and was in charge of all the U.S. scouting. So all of a sudden now the University of Denver is looking for an assistant coach. And let me tell you, the money was not what it is today in college hockey, right? So nobody was really jumping at being a coach in college hockey in those days. You weren't getting rich. And so I remember calling George, and George's like, "Yeah, I know you want to be an assistant coach. I got you. You don't have to tell me, blah, 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 but I have to go through the process." And so he interviewed, I don't know how many guys. He never did interview me, um, but I had worked for him, I'd played for him, so he knew what I was made of and what I could do for him, or at least learn from him. Um, and about 2 months into the summer, after he's done all his interviews, um, he called me up and said, "Hey, how would you like to be a full-time assistant coach?" So that's how I become a full-time assistant coach in college, kind of landed into it. So the next 3 years were awesome. I learned a lot from George. I learned a lot from my partner and assistant coach, Steve Miller, who's at the University of Minnesota now, and kind of learned the business, right? Learn the trade, learn how to teach, learn how to prepare, learn how to do uh, scouting videos, learn how to do pre-scouts, learn how to do recruiting lists, admissions. We did it all in those days, travel, flights, buses, meals, everything. So had a great experience doing that and learned a lot. Um, and I'll just keep going because the Miami job opens in 99. I'm 27 years old. There's not a chance in hell that I'm going to get a head coaching job at the Division One level. But because it was my alma mater, I felt like I needed to put my name into the ring, um, and so I did. I got a phone interview, and I don't think it went really well. And I was fine. I was an assistant coach at the University of Denver. We had just won the WCHA, and we were moving into a new building, had no reason to leave Denver, and was not going to leave Denver. Um, Fast forward 2 months later in 1999, it's August, and I'm on the recruiting trail. I actually was in Toronto watching one of our players uh, at the World Junior Camp at York University, and got a call from the athletic director, Joel Maturi, saying we'd like to bring you in on an interview. I was like, okay. Apparently, there were about three or four guys that turned the job down. Why, I don't know. Um, but all of a sudden now the job is still open, and I'm the only alum in the mix with a couple other guys. So they bring me in on an interview, go in there, do the interview. 24, I think it was less than 24 hours I was there. Flew back to Toronto to watch Matt Pettinger, who was one of our players at the World Junior Camp. And I remember watching Matt Monday morning get back because we didn't have cell phones, right? So I get back to my parents' house in Woodbridge there, and my mom said, "Mr. Maturi called you. You need to call him back." I said, "Well, he's probably calling me to tell me I didn't get the job, and thanks for the interview and all that." And sure enough, the first thing he says to me is that he says, "Rico, you're sitting down." I said, "Do I need to be sitting down?" And he said, "I think you should sit down." He goes, "How would you like to be the next head coach at Miami?" So obviously, I was thrilled and excited and scared to death. 27-year-old taking over a D1 program against Ron Mason, Red Berenson, Dave Poulin, the list was just long, of guys that I played against that were legends of the game. And so that's how I got my head coaching job at Miami.
Crazy couple years there for you, like just like listening to the stories of how you got everything. It really shows how important like networking, the image that you leave with people, whether it's for playing for them, meeting them, talking to them, and obviously how the hockey world is so small and, certain people get upgrades too or change schools and they want to bring you along too. So it's kind of right place, right time. But it's just crazy like hearing all that, like, the good fortune I would say you had, and obviously you made the most of every opportunity that, was presented to you. One question I had was when you end up getting this job, as you mentioned, like you just listed off the legendary coaches who had been in the game so long that you'd be ended up facing, and you're 27 years old. Like maybe looking back now, you can have some more insight on it. But one, did you feel confidently that you were ready, and two, like how did you maybe put together like a game plan, or whether it was a plan of recruiting, or how did you handle those first couple of years like being a head coach for the first time, especially at the D1 level?
Yeah, and just to go back a little bit, it's one thing that I think my parents that instilled in me that you always have good relationships and you respect the people that you're around and try to be a good person. And that's what I try to do every single day. Now, it's not always, you know, an easy road. Um, but I think having those relationships really helped me get to where I am today. Um, yeah, you know what? Looking back, there were a lot of things that were against us. I remember going into a few houses in those days and the parents asking me, why should we play for a 27-year-old? You don't know, you've never been through this before. How do we know we can trust you? Um, and I felt at the time, well, there's some negative recruiting going on, right? There's coaches saying that to these guys. Whether they were or not, I have no idea, but that was going on in my mind. In terms of the plan, I had George Gwozdecki on speed dial. So anytime I needed to ask a question, I would call a coach and kind of he would kind of guide me through the situation so that I can make a good decision. But I inherited two assistant coaches. I didn't have a chance to bring in my own staff till a couple of years later. So I needed to kind of navigate through the first couple of years without really, um, you know, any real sense of loyalty to me or anything like that. But it was my alma mater. I knew a lot of people on campus, so I could get around. I could ask questions of things that would come up. And I knew a lot of, Toronto was still my home. So I had just coached junior hockey not so long ago. So I had good connections in Toronto. And I had just been assistant coach at one of the best programs in WCHA at the University of Denver. So I had some good networking that I had done in British Columbia and Alberta. And so I kind of just relied on that and relied on the plan that we had at Denver and that the plan that we had when we were players at Miami and just kind of put that together and really tried to go back to the one advice George always gave me was be who you are. You can't be me. You can't be anybody else. You need to be who you are, be true to who you are, and then make your plan accordingly. And so family was really big for me, and I wanted to make sure that we were a big family. And if you've ever been to an Italian household, it doesn't sound like they love each other, but at the end of the day, they have each other's back, and they pushed you, right? So I was dead set on making sure that we were pushing the program ahead and that we were going to build this culture, build this identity, and whoever was against us was not with us, right? And there were a lot of people that questioned everything that we did. And when you're young like that, you can take it. It doesn't hurt so bad because you're focused on doing one thing, and that's to get the program to a high level. Then I was able to hire my assistant coaches. We had some success in year two, which was really, really just a blessing and really lucky. We had some really good players that I inherited from Mark Mazzolini, who did a great job at Miami, that were now seniors. And they really bought into this family and to just playing the game the right way. And we had a really good year. We finished second. We were able to win Coach of the Year. So I think that really kind of solidified ourselves after year two that, you know what, we better trust Rico and what he's trying to do so that we can help him and help the program get to another level. And so I think that that year was really important. Um, but we had a lot of, you go through a lot. You go through a lot of mistakes, recruiting mistakes. You go through system mistakes. Sometimes your lineup wasn't the way it needed to be. So all those experiences, those first few years, all led to learning and understanding how to deal with young people, how to get the most of them, how do you coach a young 18 to 22-year-old to be the best version of himself when he's got all these other distractions going on in college athletics and the college atmosphere and advisors were starting to really come into the play and college hockey players are now a little bit more touted for the NHL. So all those things were starting to happen and you needed to kind of evolve with the time. I was always a big listener in terms of the guys that had gone before me, and so I listened to those coaches. I remember Scotty Bowman and his assistant coaches would come, Barry Smith and Dave Lewis would, because George had a relationship with Barry Smith, they would come to Denver when they played the Avalanche, and they would spend a half hour talking systems and talking strategy with us. Those all those things would uh, come back to me, right? And then I would call Barry Smith and say, "Hey, what do you mean by that? How are you getting the Red Wings to, buy into chipping the puck? You got these five Russians. What are you doing with them, right? Um, and then I would ask questions. Dave Poulin was always great to ask questions because he would divulge everything that he experienced in the National Hockey League. Those were all things that I took and kind of molded. I remember watching Cornell teams, Mike Schaefer, in the early 2000s. They were big. They possessed the puck. I wanted our teams to play like that. So I would ask Mike, what are you doing? Like, how are you doing all this stuff? And so just bits and pieces from there, and you learn from everybody. Coaching is not a unique thing. You're stealing from everybody. And then you put your own spin on it. And, we were fortunate enough I was fortunate enough to have really good assistant coaches. Jeff Blashill was one of my assistant coaches for 6 years, and he did a great job with Chris Bergeron. Uh, Obviously, Blash has coached in the NHL. Burge is currently in the American Hockey League, but has been a head coach. So we kind of grew together and built our Miami program um, to becoming Frozen Four teams and a lot of really good hockey players. Not necessarily the best hockey players, but good players that believed in a system, believed in an identity, and got better as we went along and had really good success. So at the end of the day, it's not a big secret. You 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 put a good plan together, you do the work. There's going to be highs and lows, but you don't get too crazy about that. You just stay consistent on your messaging, and hopefully you get through it.
One thing I find very unique about NCAA is the longevity, I would say, of coaches in the game. It's not so much like pro sports where, in the NHL, like most of them have a couple year window and then they're moving to somewhere else or they're out, whatever it might be. Where, you, for example, spending 20 seasons at the University of Miami, Ohio as a coach. And as you mentioned before, like you had a couple Frozen Four appearances, runner up in 2009, I believe. Like you won coach of the year for your conference multiple times and coach of the year in NCAA as well. Like you kind of mentioned all the things that you were doing. Like you were always just trying to learn, pick people's brains. Like you're creating your own recipe, as you mentioned, picking things from each guy that you liked and then adding your own spin to it. But for anyone listening out there, coaches who might be interested in one day being the NCAA route, like anything you would recommend to the longevity part of it, like being able to stay somewhere for so long, and obviously, in college you're also the GM, like you're building, you're recruiting, like putting your name on the program. So any secrets or tips you would give for that part of it?
Yeah, in college hockey, when you're the head coach, you're the CEO, you're the president, GM, you're everything. And so I think for me, you know, I think you always have to surround yourself with good people and you always have to be on top of what's going on, not just there with your players, but what's going on around the country. What's the latest and greatest thing? So, um, be putting yourself out there and being vulnerable is really important for a leader. Um, and the longevity of the thing is, it isn't necessarily, um, you know, because we're great coaches. It's because you're working at it every day and those relationships that you make. And obviously you got to have some success. And if you don't have success, then, you have to be held accountable. But I would argue to say that some of the best teams in the National Hockey League or any pro sports have clarity of message and have continuity. And when they're switching coaches every 2 years, you're starting from scratch because every coach wants to come in and put their own spin on it. So it takes time to build that up. It's not always like Bruce Cassidy, you go to Vegas and win the Stanley Cup. Well, there's a culture that he went into. The credit to Bruce that won the cup in Vegas, he didn't try to change that culture. He just tweaked it a little bit and kind of went along with it. And that's also a really good skill as a coach. But it's high stakes now in every sport, and understanding where you are and the relationships you have and the staff that you have and the players that you have, to me, is the most important thing. And you got to work at it. It's a 24/7 job. You know, if you ask my wife, I sleep with the phone next to my bed, not because I like it, but because you have to, right? You don't know what's going on. These guys are they're my kids. They're my life, and you have to be there 24/7 for them. And other coaches do it differently, and that's fine. But you know, for me, the most important thing is to be present, um, and to love them up, and to make sure that you're getting the best version of everybody. And if you can do that year after year, then you're going to continue to kind of grow and develop, not only as a coach but as a program. And as long as you're doing that, I think you're going to have people that want to, stay in your corner. And then, all of a sudden it's 20 years later, and so you're still there. So there's no secret to success. You got to work at it. You gotta have a little bit of luck. But as my dad would say to me, if you don't work, you're not going to get any luck. And so I've always kept that in the back of my head.
That's a smart man. Very true. I mean, the other saying or the other version would be is hard work pays off. So, if you don't do that, it's gonna not be as likely, I think, for you to have that success or that luck in life or whatever you do. As I mentioned, you stayed there for 20 years, and then after that, you end up moving on to Providence there. I actually had Nate Leaman on. I think it was 18 months ago. I had him on, and I said this on a previous podcast. He was very generous to give me 28 minutes of his time. And those 28 minutes, I just asked a couple questions and let him talk. And it was
Yeah.
very informative for me, like hearing him talk about the game and how he got started and how he thinks about it. And my best friend played for him at Union too before he moved on to Providence. But when you went to Providence there, obviously, I think you would have been working with him too, given your job. But I believe you were the director of administration, also the associate athletic director of hockey for both the men and women's program. Like, what was kind of your day to day there, and how did that opportunity come about for you?
So I just want to go back to the when I got let go at Miami. Um, I had decided to take a year off, um, and just so the listeners know, like it's not easy, right? I'd been a head coach for 20 years. Now I got to look for a job, and I spent 6 months looking for a job. And Andrew, let me tell you, I got no's probably 17 times from American League teams, major junior teams, college teams that were looking for head coaches. I couldn't even get an interview. And I felt like I had some success at college, right? I felt like I did a pretty good job, but that didn't matter. I was now almost 48 years old, had been at one place for 20 years, and people were just not into hiring a 48-year-old head coach, even as an assistant. So I struggled. I struggled big time. It was a tough 6 months for me. And then COVID hit. And you talk about going from playing in the Frozen Fours and coaching a Division I team to absolutely ground level, being knocked on your ass and got nothing going for you. I was collecting unemployment. Don't feel bad for me, right? I don't want that. What I'm saying is sometimes even after all the success you've had, you have to pick up your, you know what, and start over again and look at yourself in the mirror and understand the situation. Thank the good Lord for what you have and what you've been through, but you got to start over, and that's okay. And I had to come to that realization. I remember Nate Leaman calling me in June and saying, "Hey, you need to take this job." I said, "Nate, I don't know anything about being an administrator. I don't want this job. I'm a coach." And Nate's like, "Just come to Providence. You're going to love it. You're going to be part of the program. We're going to, it's going to be great." And I said, "Nate, I'm not ready. I just can't do it." And Nate and I are really good friends. 2 months went by, and it's late August, and I was ready to kind of take on a new adventure in a different capacity in Michigan. And Nate called again, Nate's like, we're still looking for administrator. You got to just listen to us. Just talk to our AD, and we'd love to have you, blah, blah, blah. And I said, all right. I talked to my wife, and my wife's like, why wouldn't you? Right. So I talked to Bob Driscoll. I talked to Nate. I talked to Matt Kelly, who was the head coach there, the women's head coach. And um, so after long conversations with George again, with my family, my wife, took another leap of faith, right, to become an administrator. Knew nothing about it, right? I'd worked with administrators before. I thought I knew what I was doing, but knew nothing about it. Scared to death. Drove 15 hours during COVID to Providence, Rhode Island, to take on a new task of overseeing both men's and women's ice hockey, and some other duties that Bob had for me. So I got to Providence, and Nate was the world junior coach that year, and he was leaving for 6 weeks because it was in the bubble in Edmonton. So Ron Ralston, who's the assistant coach, Joel Beal had worked for me at Miami, and Ronnie Ralston's a great hockey mind. Um, it was going to be the two of them because Nate was going to be gone for 6 weeks. So we put a waiver into the NCAA where I could go on the ice and help out as a coach. So all of a sudden now I'm back behind the bench, right? I'm an administrator, and I'm behind the bench with the events team for 6 weeks, and loved it. I loved being assistant coach with Ronnie and Joel, and they, you know, just being a guy around, just to observe and give my opinion, not be the guy with the hammer or anything like that. Um, and then Nate came back, and I was able to sit with Nate for hours, talk about the game. He would bounce things off me, vent to me, which was part of my job. I watched the women's program go to the NCAA tournament. Was great run with them. Watched how Matt and his staff interacted with the ladies, and learned a lot from Bob Driscoll, the AD, on how to be an administrator and be a support person for the programs. And so it ended up being one of the best. And I was alone. I lived in a hotel for 6 months with my wife and daughters living back in Ohio. So talk about taking a leap of faith, being alone. And but I'll tell you what, it was one of the best decisions again that I had made in my hockey professional career. And I learned a lot. And again, it was one of those things where you had to be vulnerable and just put yourself out there. And little did I know that it was going to be as rewarding as it was.
Leap of faith is the easy way to say it. As you mentioned, there were so many factors going into it. Like you had never done something like that before, leaving your family, which is obviously always hard, especially when it's a great deal of distance. And as you mentioned, it seemed like in the end, it ended up working out well and helping you, and especially during a tough time too. Like you mentioned, COVID. It's some of us forget that that thing even happened, but there was 2, 3 years there where it's sort of just crazy with the hockey world, and I think too because of you taking this opportunity, getting a job, getting back into the NCAA world, your next job becomes available too. And for me, speaking like so, St. Thomas University, where you are the head coach of now, they are a D1 program. When I was playing, they were D3 still. My goalie partner from junior, Drew Fielding, ended up playing for them at D3 and had a lot of success there. And I think his last year he might have won Player of the Year if I remember correctly. But
You did,
um,
yeah.
you end up taking this job, and that was their first year of them becoming a Division 1 program. So you've just been given a brand new program. You got to start recruiting, guys there to play D1. You probably had some guys who were there originally as D3 players and now having to make the jump up. Like, how did that opportunity come up for you? And it must have been also an exciting challenge for you to be able to start a program fresh in a sense and kind of put your spin on it.
Yeah, it was just again, blessed. The good Lord's always looked out for me for some reason. I'd known that the University of St. Thomas, it was well known that they were going from D3 to D1 and that they were going to look for a head coach in the spring of that COVID year when I was at Providence. So, you know, again, I was set to go back to Providence. We had some really good things going. I was, felt like I was uh, making a difference. So that was important to me. Um, Joel Maturi, who was our athletic director at Miami when he hired me, um, had given me a call and said, "Hey, you mind if I give your name to St. Thomas?" And I said, "Absolutely, I don't mind." And um, when I started talking to Phil Eston that spring, our athletic director here at St. Thomas, it just became more evident to me that this was something that I thought I could do, and it would be exciting. It would be a challenge. It would be hard, but after everything that I had been through, um, this felt like the place that um, I could call home. And so one thing led to another. We had good conversations. Did a really, we couldn't do in-person interviews because it was COVID. So we did Zooms, and I'd never been on campus and talked about philosophy and all that stuff. Well, at the end of the day, I get offered the job, take another leap of faith, if you will. I know you don't like that, but left my family again in Oxford, came to St. Paul, and started this program. And the entire athletic program was moving Division 1, not just hockey. So in doing so, we had to reclassify, and so you would be on probation for 5 years from playing in any national tournament uh, games. So we were on probation. And the reason why they do that is to make sure that you're doing things that you're supposed to be doing, right? You're giving aid, the facilities are where they need to be, your travel, your budgets, all that stuff. Academic integrity is important, so make sure that you have all that in place. So here we are. We're hired April 2nd or 3rd, whatever it was, and I have no staff. I have a bunch of Division 3 players that are eager to play D1, and I got to tell half of them that they can't play for us. Um, and and the portal had opened. That was the first year of the portal, and we had 5 scholarships to give out when everybody else has 18. Oh, and by the way, we don't have a rink. We don't have a lot. We don't have anything. We just have a high school rink to play in with a locker room, 5 scholarships, um, and and a bunch of really eager Division 3 guys that were really good guys. I love the guys that we kept to play Division 1 that first year were awesome. They were uh, some of the best guys I've coached in terms of their character and their work ethic. And so now we got to put a plan again together. I got to hire a staff, equipment manager, trainer. I mean, you name it, everything. And then got to start putting this culture in place again and this identity. Um, so it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of work. Um, in the fall here, we're going to open our brand new building, state of the art. Um, from first year to second year, we made some really good strides. We added scholarships. From the second year to the third year, we spent a lot of time at first place the third year with 15 scholarships. Um, and a bunch of guys that really just wanted to work hard and learn and develop. This past year, we ended up losing in the finals with 18 scholarships, finally arrived after year 4. And now we're moving into the new building, and um, things are progressing nicely in terms of just making sure that we're developing over the years. But um, yeah, there's no manual on how to start a program from scratch, let me tell you. And we've made mistakes, and you're going to make mistakes, but that's where, we kind of went back to, all right, we've done this before. We've made mistakes before. How do we get out of it? How do we manage it? How do we manage the recruiting? How do we manage not having all the resources that we need, um, all those things that we went through early years at Miami, early years at Denver, early years of me playing at Miami. Some of the things I learned at Providence as an administrator of how to ask for things and not ask for things. All those things come into play, and it's been great. It's a lot. Like I said, it's been challenging, rewarding. Um, love where we're at as a program. Um, St. Paul's a great city. University of St. Thomas is a great institution with a lot of support and a lot of good people at the in the right spots and the leadership spots. And I'm excited about our future.
No, it sounds very, very positive and promising. And you brought up something there that I obviously, being out of NCAA for a while, I had no idea about that the probation phase there. So you would like, in a sense, had to be recruiting some people to come to your program, knowing that, hey, we're never gonna be able to get to the tournament because we're in that, especially early on, we're in that probation period. So like that's even a tough sell to like you take away the rink thing as you mentioned and the scholarships, but it's even like, hey, there's a chance you're well, not a chance, you're going to come here as a freshman for 4 years and probably not see beyond this point in the schedule because of the probation phase. So that'd be a tough sell in itself early on, I would say. I want to
It
bring up two.
was.
I want to bring up too the we talked about off camera the like you brought up the portal and stuff, but now there's the new uh major junior rule that has been changed where, before it was you had to pick one route or the other, and that was the route you would go, where now it's major junior players can play NCAA after playing major junior. So for someone like yourself with recruiting and everything, I believe it just opens up a new avenue to being able to get athletes that maybe weren't attainable before to come to your program. But how have you seen in the short amount of time that this rule has been approved, has there been a change in your recruiting process? Has it just opened a database to more players maybe that you weren't looking at before? Or like, do you think it's going to be a positive effect for the NCAA game?
I think it eventually will be a positive thing. I think it does open up a lot of players that we weren't privileged to in the past. And so you really still have to, the recruiting thing is just like scouting, right? You still have to be calculated. You still have to recruit to your identity. You still have to recruit to your university. Eligibility rules are still in play. So there's a lot of factors that are still, really, really important when you're recruiting whomever you're recruiting, right? It just opens up another avenue for these young people, and it changes the development model, I think. And so in the next couple of years, you're going to see that really kind of streamline a little bit more, where it used to be where you could play, um, major junior and go to the NHL. You could go junior A tier two or junior B USHL in the US or North American League, play college hockey and go to the NHL. I think what you're going to see now is more of a straight line development path to the NHL where you're going major junior, USHL, tier one juniors or whatever. Uh, you're going to make a stop. If you're not one of those elite top 10, top five players that are going to go right from major junior to the NHL, and even some of those guys might still make a stop at college just because it's another step, right? We feel like our college game is become really a really good stepping stone to the NHL. You're playing against older guys, you're playing a high level, the speed, the intensity, the preparation, the development that you're going through from day to day, it is really something that the guys can use to springboard them to play at the highest level. And so right now there's different schools of thought. There's a lot of guys, there's a lot of teams that are just kind of mass recruiting major junior, and that's fine. We've taken the another approach where we've been calculated. We want to make sure we're still true to who we are, so we're very selective on who we recruited, and we have recruited. The WHL, the OHL, the Q have been great partners so far, and I think that's going to continue to happen because of that development model, that streamline that I talked about. Um, and so I think in the end it'll be a positive thing for everybody. And you and I back in the day would probably have gone and played a little major junior before we went to college. So that would have been an interesting thing. We might have been better college players, who knows? Um, but um, but I do think it's a positive, especially where we're at today, right? The good thing about being on this earth is that things change all the time and you have to evolve and kind of go with the times and be smart about it. And I think the uh, some of the unintended consequences will kind of iron themselves out here over the next couple of years, and then it'll be much better for everybody.
No, I definitely agree. I'm very curious to see, in 10 years from now, how the impact has been. And you brought up a great point. Like I laughed when you said it. Yeah, we for sure would have tried the major junior route if that rule had existed back then because there was no eligibility burning anymore. So yeah, definitely a little jealous of the athletes today being able to experience both avenues. But I think, as you mentioned, it's great, and the the development line now to the NHL has multiple paths too. So only good for the game. Last one for you here. I always end on this one. Just kind of a question I like to ask my guests. What is one piece of advice or multiple pieces of advice you would give the younger generation out there?
Well, I think we already mentioned it. And I argue with my daughters all the time about this, but the relationships you build, how you treat people, um, is really important. Those are things that you you don't know where it's going to take you. You don't know the impact that that might have down the road. And just being a good person, right? The old treat people the way you want to be treated is really still part of what we do as human beings on this earth, right? And I know there's a lot of distractions out there right now, but if you could just build your relationships, and we do this with our team all the time, it's really important to have good relationships and trust each other and respect each other. You always have to agree, but if you come from a place of love, then all those things kind of, fall into place and you can get through some of the tough times. So that's number one. And I think number two, too, is you know, just work hard. Don't judge people. Do what you do. Try to be the best version of yourself every day. Um, you know, we like to think about the future a lot, but be present. Be where your feet are because it goes by fast. And I always say this to young parents too. Enjoy the terrible twos, enjoy the long nights where you're not sleeping because it goes fast. And when you blink, all of a sudden they're 24 and you're walking them down the aisle or your grandparents or whatever, and it just passes by fast. So enjoy the moment, work hard. Um, Life's too short. I know people say that, but it's when you get a little bit older, it actually does become very short. And make the most of your time where you're at, and things will work out well.
A lot of good advice there, to be honest. And yeah, like the be where your feet are thing that's been brought up before in this podcast. And I try to stress it too, because a lot of times you spend so much time either stressing about the future or dwelling on the past of something. But, as you mentioned, life goes by fast. So if you're f focused on doing that and focusing on that stuff too much, you don't actually enjoy what you're doing at the time. And, life's a great journey. And, yeah, for someone like yourself too, you've created great relationships over your time in hockey, and that has allowed you to have the career you've had, I would say. So those are definitely good pieces of advice to have. I'm excited for you guys to get in your new rink next year. That's very exciting. Good for your program as well. And yeah, thanks for doing this again. Thanks for taking the time, and best of luck next season.
Sandra, I really appreciate it.
And for those listening, if anyone's ever in the St. Paul area there in Minnesota, you want to check out a game, I recommend you get out there. CCHA has some great hockey, and yeah, brand new arena. So go check it out. Maybe let me know how it looks, and maybe if I can get out there, I'll find my way down to Minnesota and check out a game. And for those listening, until next week, juice and ciao.